I won millions in the lottery and kept it a secret because my own son wanted to lock me in a nursing home to get his hands on it all. That was until I learned that being a mother doesn't mean being a slave for life. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if, for just a second, you feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Grace Miller. I'm 69 years old, and I live in a small apartment in the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago. The cream-colored walls are stained with dampness from the last big storm, and the cracked linoleum floors look like maps of all the places I never got to travel. Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, I get up with the first ray of sun that slips through the curtainless window, because my daughter-in-law took the good ones when they moved out of my house 5 years ago. My routine never changes. I make coffee in an old enamel pot because the coffee maker broke and I don't have the money to fix it. I sit in the only chair that doesn't wobble, at the wooden table my late husband made with his own hands, and I go over the bills that always add up to more than I have. The electric bill, the gas bill, the rent that gets heavier each month like a stone on my chest. But this October morning was different. My phone buzzed with a message that made me drop my coffee cup, staining the overdue notices. It was my son, Robert. "Mom, we need to talk. Lucy and I have made a very important decision about your future." My hands trembled as I read those words. Robert, my only son, the boy I held in my arms when he had a fever, the one I sang lullabies to for entire nights when he couldn't sleep, the one I defended from other kids who made fun of him for not having new shoes. That same Robert was now talking about my future, as if it belonged to him. I just stood there, the spilled coffee forming a brown puddle on the table, watching the liquid drip to the floor, drop by drop, like tears I hadn't shed yet. Images I thought I'd forgotten flashed through my mind. 8-year-old Robert, hugging me when his father died in a construction accident. 15-year-old Robert, promising that when he grew up, he would always take care of me. 25-year-old Robert, on his wedding day, whispering in my ear, "Thanks for everything, Mom. Now it's my turn to take care of you." That memory hurt more than any physical blow. Because now, at 42, Robert had fulfilled his promise in a way I never imagined. Taking care of me meant deciding for me, as if I were a child incapable of managing her own life. The doorbell rang at 3 in the afternoon, just as I was finishing cleaning up the coffee mess. I opened the door and there they were. Robert in the gray suit he wears for important meetings at the bank where he works, and Lucy, my daughter-in-law, with her designer handbag and those heels that clicked like tiny hammers against the floor when she walked. They both had that forced smile that doctors give you when they're about to deliver bad news. "Hi, Mom," Robert said, kissing my cheek with the kind of haste busy people use. "How are you? You look a little tired." Lucy didn't greet me. She never does. She walked straight in to inspect my apartment with that critical gaze I had come to know over the last few years. Her eyes lingered on the sagging sofa, the old TV with its fuzzy picture, the faded curtains I had washed so many times I couldn't remember their original color. "Sit down," I told them, gesturing to the sofa. "Want some coffee?" "No, Mom." Robert perched on the edge of the cushion, as if he were in a hurry to leave. "We came to talk to you about something very serious." Lucy pulled some glossy brochures from her bag, full of pictures of places that looked like elegant hotels. She placed them on the table carefully, as if they were legal documents. "Look, Grace," Lucy said, using the tone teachers use with slow children. "Robert and I have been looking into options for you. Places where you can be better cared for, with people your own age, with activities, with 24-hour medical care." I looked at the brochures. "St. Francis Meadows," one read. "The Willows Senior Living," said another. The photos showed smiling seniors playing cards, strolling through perfect gardens. Everything looked so clean, so organized, so final. "Robert," I said, feeling my voice start to break. "What are you talking about?" My son sighed, as if he were the one who was suffering. "Mom, you have to understand. Lucy and I work all day. The kids are in school. We have expenses, responsibilities. And well, you're not the same as you used to be." "What do you mean by that?" Lucy leaned forward with that expression of false compassion she had perfected. Last week I called you and you told me you'd seen your sister Carol at the market. Carol died 3 years ago, Grace. It was true. I had said it. But not because I was confused, but because I missed Carol so much that sometimes I pretended she was still alive. It was my way of keeping her close, of not accepting that I was completely alone in the world. But how could I explain that without sounding crazy? That was just... I began. And yesterday, Robert continued, Mr. Henderson from the corner store told me you came in to buy milk 3 times on the same day. He said you seemed lost. That was also true. I had gone 3 times because every time I got home I forgot why I had gone out. Not because of dementia, but because my mind was so consumed with how I was going to pay next month's rent that I couldn't focus on anything else. But they didn't know that. They didn't know that every night I lay awake doing math that never added up, calculating how many cans of beans I could buy with the few dollars I had left. Look, Mom. Robert took my hand, but his touch felt cold, mechanical. It's not that we don't love you. We love you, but you need specialized care. In these places, there are doctors, nurses, trained staff. I don't need doctors, I protested. I just need... What do you need? Lucy asked, with that impatience that surfaced whenever I tried to explain myself. Do you need Robert to take days off from work every time you feel sick? For me to leave my kids to come take care of you when you have the flu? Her words hit me like slaps. Because it was true that last month I had called Robert when I felt dizzy and couldn't get out of bed. It was true that I had needed them to take me to the doctor when my knee swelled up. It was true that sometimes I bothered them with my elderly fears. That I heard strange noises at night. That my gas was out, and I didn't know how to get it fixed. Besides, Lucy added, flipping through a brochure, these places aren't that expensive. We'll sell your apartment, and with that money, we can pay for your stay for several years. It's a smart investment. There it was. The truth behind all their concern. My apartment. The only asset I had left. The place where I had lived for the last 30 years. Where I had raised Robert. Where I had mourned my husband's death. Where I had grown old, step by step. They wanted to sell it. This place is worth a lot now, Lucy continued, as if she couldn't see the tears welling up in my eyes. Logan Square has gotten really trendy. We could easily get $400,000 for it. Robert nodded, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. And you'd be so much better off. No worries, no cooking, no cleaning, just resting. Resting. As if I were already dead. I stayed quiet for several long minutes, looking at those brochures that promised a life that wasn't a life, but a waiting room for death. In the pictures, all the old people looked happy, but their smiles were the same as the ones actors have in commercials. Perfect and empty. And what if I don't want to? I finally asked. Robert and Lucy exchanged a look, that silent communication couples have when they've discussed something many times before. Mom, Robert said with forced patience, you're not in a position to make this decision. You need help evaluating what's best for you. I'm your mother, not your child, I said, feeling rage begin to boil in my chest. Yes, but... Robert stood up and started pacing my small living room, as if the space bothered him. Look at this place, Mom. It's falling apart. The dampness, the leaks, the noisy neighbors. It's not dignified for a person your age. What Robert didn't understand was that this place, with all its imperfections, was my history. Every stain on the wall held a memory. The crack in the ceiling appeared the night my first grandson was born. The scuff mark on the floor was where I used to put the playpen when Robert left the kids with me on weekends. Every corner of this apartment held pieces of my life that couldn't be packed into boxes. We've already made an appointment to visit one tomorrow, Lucy announced, putting the brochures back in her bag. It's just so you can see it, see how nice it is. They weren't asking me. They were informing me. After they left, I sat in my chair by the window and looked out at the street. Kids were playing soccer on the sidewalk. Women were hanging laundry on their balconies. Mr. Rossi was sweeping the entrance to his shop just as he had for the last 20 years. Everything was the same. But I no longer belonged in that normality. I took the Powerball ticket I had bought that morning out of my wallet, like I had every week for 15 years. The same numbers. U07, 14, 23, 31, 42, 50. Robert's birthday, mine, my husband's, My grandchildren's? I looked at it and thought how ridiculous it was to keep dreaming of winning when the only thing I had won in life was the right to be thrown away by my own family. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake imagining what it would be like to live in one of those places, waking up when they told me to, eating what they served me, watching TV in a common room with strangers who had also been discarded by their families. I thought about my things. The photos of Robert as a baby, the wedding dress stored in the closet, the love letters my husband wrote me when we were dating. All of that would disappear when they sold the apartment. And then, as I cried silently in my bed, I heard the sound of the neighbor's TV next door. They were broadcasting the lottery drawing. The numbers came out one by one, like a slow torture. 07, 14, 23, 31, 42, 50. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I looked at the crumpled ticket in my hand and then at the screen. The numbers matched perfectly. All of them. I had won $8.5 million. But instead of screaming with joy, the first thing I thought was, if Robert finds out, he'll put me in the most expensive home he can find and take everything. I spent the entire morning sitting on the edge of my bed, the winning ticket trembling between my fingers like a dry leaf about to crumble. $8.5 million. A number so large it wouldn't fit in my head, that sounded unreal, like the figures they announce on the news about government budgets. But there it was, printed on that slip of paper I had bought with the last $2 in my coin purse. The first ray of sunlight filtered through the window and found me still awake, calculating. If Robert found out, he wouldn't just put me in the most expensive home in the city. He would find a legal way to control my money. I knew him. He was meticulous, smart, and he worked at a bank. He knew exactly how the financial system worked, how to bend the laws in his favor. I was just an old woman with a high school diploma who had spent her life cleaning other people's houses. I stood up on numb legs and walked to the kitchen. I put water on to boil for coffee, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped the pot. The clang of metal against the linoleum floor echoed through the apartment, and for a moment I was scared the neighbors had heard and would come ask what was wrong, as if the noise itself could give away my secret. I picked up the pot and tried again. This time I managed to make the coffee, but I forgot to add sugar. I drank it black, just like everything my life had been up to that point. As I sipped the hot liquid, I thought of all the times Robert had told me I didn't understand money, that it was better for him to manage my meager savings, that I was too naive to deal with banks and paperwork. Naive? Me, who had stretched every dollar so he could get a college degree. Me, who had worked double shifts cleaning offices to pay for his books and tuition. Me, who had lost my teeth because I didn't have money for the dentist, but I did have enough to buy his uniforms for the private school he attended. At 9 a.m, the doorbell rang. It was Robert, alone, without Lucy. He was holding a Starbucks cup and wearing that smile he used when he wanted something important. "Good morning, Mom. I brought you coffee, the kind you like." A lie. I had never had Starbucks coffee in my life. I didn't know if I liked it because I'd never had the money to buy it. "Thank you, honey," I said, tucking the lottery ticket into the pocket of the apron I always wear at home. "How are the kids?" "Good, good," he replied distractedly, looking around the apartment as if he were sizing it up for a sale. "Listen, Mom, I wanted to talk to you before we go see the home. I mean, the residence. The home." The word had slipped out. It was what he really thought of those places. Warehouses for the elderly where families dump them to avoid feeling guilty. He sat on the sagging sofa and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. It was the posture he adopted when he had to solve problems at the bank, when he analyzed loans or investments. "I've been thinking," he began, "and I think it would be best if we signed some papers before you make the move. To protect you, you know, so no one can take advantage of you." "What kind of papers?" "Nothing complicated. Just a power of attorney so I can handle your affairs while you get settled into your new life. The sale of the apartment, your small savings, the healthcare paperwork, it's all for your own good." There it was. The real reason for his morning visit, for his store-bought coffee, for his rehearsed smile. He wanted me to sign over total control of my life before he locked me away where I couldn't protest. "Robert," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I can still think for myself." "Of course you can, Mom. No one's saying otherwise. But you've said it yourself. You feel tired, confused sometimes. It's normal at your age, and as your son, it's my responsibility to take care of you. Responsibility. As if I were a burden he had inherited along with my few pieces of old furniture. And what if I don't want to sign anything? Robert sighed, with that exaggerated patience he used when he thought someone was being stubborn for no reason. Mom, don't make this any harder than it already is. If you don't cooperate, it will be worse for everyone. We can do this the easy way, or what? Or I'll have to explore other legal options. Have you declared incompetent? Get a court-appointed guardian. Would you prefer a stranger to make decisions for you instead of your own son? Threats. My own son was threatening me in my own living room while drinking coffee he'd paid for with money he earned thanks to the sacrifices I had made for him. I got up from the sofa and walked to the window. Across the street, an old woman was watering the plants on her balcony. She looked peaceful, in charge of her own time, her own space. No one was pressuring her to give up her life. Give me time to think about it, I said without looking at him. Time for what? Mom, there's nothing to think about. It's what's best for you. Give me time, I repeated, more firmly this time. Robert stood up, and I heard his footsteps approaching the window. When he spoke, his voice was different, colder. Fine, but the appointment at the residence is still for 4 o'clock today. Lucy will be here to pick you up at 3:30. Don't be late. After he left, I took out the lottery ticket and looked at it again. The numbers were still there, perfect and unchanging. 07, 14, 23, 31, 42, 50. $8.5 million that could change my life, or destroy it completely if they fell into the wrong hands. I made a decision I never thought I would make in my life: to lie to my son. I looked in the phone book and found the address of a lawyer whose office was 6 blocks from my house. I showered, put on my least wrinkled dress, and tucked the ticket deep into my purse, wrapped in a handkerchief that had belonged to my mother. Mr. Hernandez's office was on the 2nd floor of an old building, with stairs that creaked under my feet. The waiting room smelled of dampness and stale tobacco, and had magazines from years ago stacked on a scratched coffee table. It wasn't the kind of place Robert would take his important business, but it was what I could afford. Mr. Hernandez was a man in his 60s, with thick glasses and a belly that spoke of years of heavy meals. When I showed him the ticket, his glasses nearly fell off his face. "Mrs. Miller?" he said, nervously cleaning his lenses. This is a fortune. Are you sure you want to handle this on your own?" "I'm sure I don't want my son to know about it." I explained my situation while he took notes in a yellowed legal pad. The residence, the threats, Robert's plans to control my finances. When I finished, the lawyer looked at me with a mixture of sadness and respect. "I understand perfectly, ma'am. Unfortunately, I've seen similar cases. Children who suddenly become very concerned about their parents when money appears. What can I do? First, we're going to claim this ticket through an anonymous trust. You will be the beneficiary, but your name won't appear on any public records. Second, we will establish a will and very specific powers of attorney that protect your interests. And third, if you'll allow me to advise you, don't sign anything your son gives you until we've reviewed all the documents." The process took all morning. I signed papers I didn't fully understand, but the lawyer explained every clause with patience. When I left his office, I was no longer a vulnerable old woman with $8.5 million. I was a woman protected by the law, with resources that no one could touch without my consent. I got home just as Lucy was knocking on the door. She was dressed for a business meeting, in a pantsuit and carrying a briefcase. She had clearly done her research on the home where they wanted to lock me away. "Ready, Grace?" she asked, checking her gold watch. "We can't be late." During the drive in her car, Lucy explained the advantages of the place we were going to visit. It had a swimming pool, gardens, recreational activities, 24-hour medical service. It sounded like a luxury resort, but I knew it was a gilded cage where families deposit their elders to forget about them with a clear conscience. The Willows Senior Living was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and perfectly manicured lawns. The director, a middle-aged woman with a salesperson's smile, greeted us in a lobby that looked like it belonged to a 5-star hotel. Mrs. Miller, it's so wonderful to meet you, she said, shaking my hand with rehearsed enthusiasm. Your daughter-in-law has told me so much about you. I'm sure you'll feel right at home here. They took me on a tour they had clearly given thousands of times. The hallways smelled of flower-scented disinfectant, the rooms were perfectly clean, and the residence we saw looked empty. They smiled as we passed, but their eyes had the dullness of people who have lost hope. In the dining room, an elderly man in his 80s approached me. Are you coming to live here too? He asked in a trembling voice. I'm considering it, I replied. Don't do it, he whispered, glancing nervously at the director. You just come here to die. My son promised me it was temporary, but I've been here 3 years and he never visits. The director quickly approached and led the old man away with a forced smile. Mr. Peterson is always making jokes. He's our most mischievous resident, aren't you? But I had seen the desperation in the old man's eyes, and I understood he was warning me. At the end of the tour, we sat in the director's office to discuss the details. Lucy had a folder ready with all the documents, a residency contract, medical forms, and the price, $8,000 a month. With the sale of Mrs. Miller's apartment, Lucy told the director, we could pay for 2 full years in advance. That would give us a discount, right? Of course. A 30% discount for paying in advance. They were negotiating my imprisonment as if it were the purchase of a refrigerator. And the worst part was, they had already calculated the exact worth of my freedom. 2 years of my life for the price of my apartment. What do you think, Mrs. Miller? The director asked me. Would you like to reserve a room? I looked at Lucy, who was watching me with the expectant smile of someone who already considers a deal closed. I thought of Robert, waiting at home for me to sign the papers that would give him total control over my life. I thought of the $8.5 million that were now safe in an account that only I could touch. I'd like to think about it a little more, I said finally. Lucy's smile vanished. Grace, we've already talked about this. There's nothing to think about. There's a lot to think about, I replied. And for the first time in years, my voice sounded firm and resolute. This is my life, and I'm going to take the time I need to decide what to do with it. The ride home was spent in a tense silence you could cut with a knife. Lucy drove with her hands clenched on the steering wheel, and every time we stopped at a red light, I heard her sigh with the exasperation she reserved for when things didn't go her way. In the rearview mirror, I could see her frowning, clearly annoyed that I hadn't signed anything at the residence. I don't understand what you need to think so much about, she finally said when we were 2 blocks from my apartment. It's obvious this is what's best for you. Medical care, balanced meals, activities to keep you active. What more could you want? I want to decide for myself, I replied, looking out the window at the streets of my neighborhood, the taco stands I had known for decades, the shops where everyone greeted me by name. Decide, Lucy repeated with a bitter laugh. Grace, you can't even decide what you're having for breakfast. Last week Robert had to come over because your gas was out and you didn't know who to call to get the tank changed. It was true. The gas had run out and I had panicked. But not because I was incapable of solving the problem, but because the tank ran out right when I was cooking beans for the whole week, and I was terrified of running out of food. When you have $10 in your wallet and it's 10 days until your next small pension check, every dollar counts. Calling the gas company meant paying for the service call, the new tank, and being left with no money for other basic needs. But how could I explain that to Lucy, who bought a new handbag every month, and whose biggest financial problem was deciding whether to buy shoes in black or brown? Besides, she continued, stopping in front of my building, it's not like you have a lot of options. Robert has already spoken with a lawyer to speed up the process. If you keep being stubborn, he'll have to find other, more drastic alternatives. Drastic alternatives. I knew exactly what she meant. An incompetency hearing, where a judge would declare that I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own affairs. Robert would present my forgetfulness, my moments of confusion, my panicked calls when I didn't know how to solve a household problem as evidence. And with his job at the bank, his well-pressed suit, and his polished vocabulary, it would be easy to convince any authority that he was the responsible son trying to care for his senile mother. Thanks for the ride, I said, getting out of the car. Grace, she shouted before I closed the door. Think about it. Robert is coming tomorrow morning with the papers. Don't make it any harder than it has to be. I climbed the stairs to my apartment with my legs trembling, not from exhaustion, but from rage. A rage that had been growing inside me for months, fed by every condescending comment, every decision they made about my life without consulting me, every time they treated me like a piece of old furniture that gets in the way but can't be thrown out for sentimental reasons. I had barely closed the door when the phone rang. It was Robert. "Hi, Mom. How did the visit go?" "Fine," I answered curtly. "Just fine? Lucy told me the place is amazing. It has everything you need." "Yes, it's very nice." There was a pause. Robert knew my tone when I was upset, and he knew something wasn't going according to his plan. "Mom, are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm tired." "That's exactly why you need to be in a place where you don't have to worry about anything. I'm coming over early tomorrow so we can sign the papers, okay? Everything's ready." "Robert," I said, feeling the words catch in my throat. "Do you love me?" The question caught him off guard. He was silent for several seconds. "Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. That's why I'm doing all this." "And what if I don't want to go?" "Mom, we've been over this. It's not about what you want. It's about what you need. You can't see things objectively because you're too emotionally involved." Emotionally involved, as if wanting to continue living in my own home was an irrational whim instead of a basic right. "Okay, honey, we'll talk tomorrow." "All right. Get some rest. I love you." I hung up the phone and stood there, in the middle of my living room, looking at the cracks in the ceiling that I knew by heart, the damp stains that appeared every rainy season, the old furniture that Robert considered undignified, but that for me were witnesses to a whole life. I took the lottery ticket out of my purse and placed it on the table. $8.5 million, a sum I couldn't even fully imagine. With that money, I could buy a new house, hire private caregivers, travel to all the places I'd never seen, live with dignity until the last day of my life. But I also knew that if Robert found out, he would find a way to convince a judge that an old woman with that amount of money needed legal protection from scammers and opportunists. He would become my legal guardian, and I would lose both the money and my freedom. I couldn't eat dinner that night. My stomach was in knots with anxiety. I sat in my chair by the window and watched the nightlife of my neighborhood. The young people buying beer at Mr. Rossi's store, the women coming home from the night shift, the kids playing soccer under the streetlights. All those people had problems, worries, financial difficulties, but they all had something I was about to lose: the freedom to make decisions about their own lives. Around 11 o'clock, I heard footsteps in the hallway and voices whispering in front of my door. I recognized Robert's voice, and another I didn't immediately identify. "As of tomorrow, she won't be a problem anymore," I heard Robert say. "Once she signs the papers, we can proceed with the sale immediately." "And if she resists?" the other voice asked. "She won't resist. She's too confused to fight back. Besides, I have medical documentation to back up her incapacity." My blood ran cold. Medical documentation? Where had Robert gotten medical documentation about me? Did the doctor cooperate? Of course. I explained the situation. An elderly woman living alone with episodes of confusion, unable to manage her finances. It's a classic case of age-related cognitive decline. They walked away down the hall, but I stayed pressed against the door, my heart beating so loudly I was sure it could be heard outside. Robert had forged a medical diagnosis. He had gotten some corrupt doctor to sign papers declaring me mentally incompetent, without me ever having been examined. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at the kitchen table, making mental lists of everything Robert knew about my life. My bank account numbers, the approximate value of my apartment, my meager savings, even the location of my original will where I left everything to him. But there was one thing Robert didn't know, that I had just become a millionaire. At 6 in the morning, I called Mr. Hernandez. "I'm sorry to bother you so early, Mr. Hernandez, but I need to see you urgently." "What happened, Mrs. Miller?" I told him about the conversation I had overheard, about the false medical documentation, about Robert's plans to make me sign papers that very morning. "All right, ma'am. Come to my office immediately. We're going to take preventive measures." I showered, dressed in my best clothes, and put some important documents in a plastic bag. Before leaving, I left a note on the table. Robert, went out to run some errands. Be back this afternoon. Mr. Hernandez was waiting for me with hot coffee and a folder full of new documents. Mrs. Miller, I've been doing some research on your son. Robert Miller, correct? Works at Chase Bank. Married to Lucy Vasquez. 2 minor children. Yes, that's him. I have bad news. Your son has indeed been preparing an incompetency case against you. He has already filed a preliminary petition with the family court, alleging severe cognitive decline and inability to manage financial affairs. The folder slipped from my hands. Does that mean I can't do anything? On the contrary, it means we have to act fast, but we can still protect you completely. The lawyer opened the folder and showed me several documents. First, we're going to file a declaration of mental capacity certified by an independent psychiatrist. Second, we're going to register a very specific revocable power of attorney where you maintain full control over your decisions. Third, we're going to file a criminal complaint against your son for forgery of documents. A criminal complaint? Ma'am, what your son is doing is a crime. He is using false medical documents to strip you of your rights. That's punishable by prison. The idea of sending Robert to jail turned my stomach. As much of a traitor as he had become, he was still my son. The baby I had held in my arms. The one I had sung lullabies to. The one for whom I had sacrificed everything. Isn't there another way? There is another way, the lawyer said, closing the folder. But it will require you to be very brave and very smart. What do you mean? We play his game. You pretend to be confused and vulnerable while we prepare a perfect legal trap. When he least expects it, we will reveal that you have been completely aware of everything, and that you have the legal and financial resources to defend yourself. He explained the plan to me while I took notes in an old notebook. It was risky, but it was the only way to protect both my money and my freedom without completely destroying Robert. Are you willing to do it? The lawyer asked me. I looked out his office window at the street, where ordinary people were living their normal lives without anyone trying to control them or strip them of their basic rights. Yes, I said. I'm ready. I returned home at 2 in the afternoon. Robert was already waiting for me at the entrance to the building, with a briefcase full of papers and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hi, Mom. Where have you been? I've been waiting for you since 10. I went for a walk, I lied. I like to walk when I'm nervous. Nervous about what? About this whole change. It's very hard for me. Robert hugged me, and for a moment I almost believed his concern was genuine. That's why I want to get everything settled today, Mom. So you don't have to worry about anything anymore. We went up to my apartment, and Robert spread the papers out on the table like a salesman closing a major deal. Look, there are only a few documents. This is the power of attorney. This is the residency contract. And this is the authorization for the sale of the apartment. I just need you to sign here, here, and here. I took the papers and pretended to read them with difficulty, frowning as if the letters were hard to make out. Son, this is so complicated. I barely understand any of it. You don't have to understand, Mom. I'll take care of everything. Just sign. And what if I regret it later? You won't regret it. It's what's best for you. I took the pen he offered me, and for a moment, Robert thought he had won. But then, instead of signing, I dropped the pen and looked him straight in the eye. You know what, son? I think I'd better not. Robert's expression changed so quickly it was like watching 2 different people in the same body. The paternal, concerned smile vanished, and in its place appeared something I had never seen before in my son's eyes. A calculating coldness that made me feel like I was looking at a stranger. What do you mean, no, Mom? His voice had changed too. It was no longer the soft, condescending tone he had been using. Now it sounded impatient, almost aggressive. We already agreed you were going to sign. We never agreed on anything, I replied, keeping my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see them shaking. You decided I was going to sign, but I never agreed. Robert shot up from his chair and began to pace my small living room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from when he was a boy and didn't get what he wanted. But this wasn't a childish tantrum over a toy. It was the frustration of an adult whose plan was failing. Mom, you don't understand the situation. This isn't optional. You need specialized care, and I have a legal responsibility to make sure you get it. Legal responsibility? Robert stopped in front of the window, his back to me. When he spoke, his voice was different, colder and more professional, like when he handled banking matters with difficult clients. I've consulted with specialists in family law. I have medical documentation certifying your cognitive decline. If you don't cooperate voluntarily, I will have to initiate incompetency proceedings to protect you from yourself. There it was, the direct threat. He was no longer pretending this was for my well-being. He was now openly admitting he was willing to use legal force to control my life. Medical documentation? I asked, feigning confusion. But I haven't been to the doctor in months. Robert turned to face me with a smile that was not pleasant at all. Dr. Ramirez is very good in these cases. He understands that sometimes families need professional help to make difficult decisions about their elderly relatives. Dr. Ramirez. A name I didn't know, but one that Robert had clearly paid to sign the false diagnosis he needed. I wondered how much it had cost him to buy that doctor's professional ethics. Robert, I said, trying to put all the sadness I genuinely felt into my voice. Do you really think I'm crazy? My question seemed to take him by surprise. He sat down again across from me, but this time there was no trace of the fake tenderness from before. You're not crazy, Mom. But you're old, and old people make mistakes. They forget important things, make stupid decisions, get taken in by scammers. I'm just trying to protect you. Who are you protecting me from? From yourself, from unscrupulous people who take advantage of vulnerable seniors, from the real world, which is crueler than you can handle at your age. His words hurt more than any physical blow because they revealed what Robert really thought of me, that I was useless, a burden, a pathetic old woman incapable of living without supervision. And what if I don't want your protection? It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what you need. Robert gathered the papers from the table and put them in his briefcase with precise, controlled movements. When he spoke again, his tone was that of someone who has just lost patience with a stubborn subordinate. Fine, Mom. We'll do it the hard way. Tomorrow, I'm filing the incompetency petition. In 3 weeks, there will be a hearing where a judge will listen to Dr. Ramirez's testimony, review the evidence of your mental decline, and appoint me as your legal guardian. He approached me and leaned in until his face was just inches from mine. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. And when that happens, you won't have a voice or a vote in anything. I will decide where you live, how you spend your money, even if you can leave your room. Do you understand? It was a pure and simple threat. My own son was blackmailing me in my own living room, using the laws designed to protect the vulnerable elderly as weapons to strip me of my dignity. I understand, I said softly. Robert smiled with satisfaction, believing he had won. Perfect. Then tomorrow we'll start the process. After he left, I sat in my chair for hours, processing what had just happened. It wasn't just that Robert wanted my money or my apartment. It was that he truly saw me as an object, as his possession that he could manage as he pleased. At 7 in the evening, the phone rang. It was Lucy. Grace, Robert told me you were being difficult again. I don't understand why you insist on complicating things. Because it's my life and my decisions. Your decisions? Lucy laughed with that artificial laugh she used when she wanted to sound superior. Like when you decided to let the gas run out? Or when you decided to buy spoiled food because it was cheaper. Every example she gave was real, but taken completely out of context. Yes, the gas had run out because I was counting every penny to make it to the end of the month. Yes, I had bought slightly overripe vegetables because on my meager pension I couldn't afford fresh food. But those weren't irrational decisions. They were the survival decisions of someone living in poverty. Grace, you can't take care of yourself. That's the reality. And Robert can't keep missing work every time you have an emergency. What emergencies? Seriously? Last week you called crying because you heard strange noises in the middle of the night. Robert had to come rushing over, thinking you were being robbed, and it turned out to be the building's cats. It was true. I had heard noises and gotten scared. When you live alone in an old building, in a neighborhood where break-ins aren't rare, any sound at night can be terrifying. But to Lucy, my fear was evidence of senility. And you know what? Lucy continued. I'm tired of pretending this is negotiable. Robert has made his decision. With or without your cooperation, you are going to the residence. The only difference is whether it's going to be easy or hard. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. Tomorrow, Robert files the papers. In 3 weeks, there's a hearing. And by then, we will have everything ready. Testimony from neighbors about your erratic behavior, the medical report from Dr. Ramirez, evidence that you can't manage your finances. Lucy paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had a tone of anticipated triumph. You know what else we have? Recordings of all the times you've called us confused or scared. Robert saved them all. 3 years of evidence of your mental decline. I was speechless. Robert had been recording my calls for help, documenting every moment of vulnerability, every time I had needed assistance, to use as evidence against me. Oh, and one more thing, Lucy added before hanging up. Starting tomorrow, we'll be monitoring your movements. If you try to do anything stupid, like give away your money or sign strange documents, we'll use it as further evidence of your mental incapacity. So behave yourself. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the dial tone. That night, I couldn't eat. My stomach was in a complete knot from the anguish. I sat on my bed, hugging the pillow that had belonged to my husband, trying to understand how I had reached this point. Robert, the baby who had been born after 18 hours of labor, the boy who had had such a high fever that doctors feared for his life, the teenager who was ashamed of our poverty but had never disrespected me, the young man who had cried in my arms the day he graduated from college, telling me that everything he had achieved was thanks to my sacrifices. When had he become this cold, calculating person who was willing to destroy my dignity for money? Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway again. This time, they didn't stop in front of my door, but went down the stairs very slowly, as if someone were trying not to make a noise. I peeked out the window and saw Robert on the street, talking on his phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his gestures were agitated, as if he were giving someone urgent instructions. When he hung up, he stood under the streetlight for several minutes, looking up at my window. Although I knew he couldn't see me in the dark, I instinctively stepped back. The next day, very early, I called Mr. Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez, I need to speed up the plan. Robert is going to file the papers today. Perfect, Mrs. Miller. Everything is ready on our end. Are you prepared for what's coming? How hard is it going to be? It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. You're going to have to pretend to be exactly what your son says you are. A confused, vulnerable old woman. You're going to have to endure humiliation. You're going to have to bite your tongue when they treat you like a child. You're going to have to act as if you really need others to make decisions for you. And what if I can't do it? What if I forget I'm acting? Then you will lose everything, ma'am. Your freedom, your money, your dignity, everything. I left the lawyer's office with a strange feeling in my chest, as if I were preparing for a war where the weapons were lies and the bullets were legal documents. When I got home, there was a yellow envelope under my door. Inside, an official summons from the family court. Robert had already filed the incompetency petition. I had exactly 18 days to prove that the son I had raised with so much love was trying to steal my life, or to lose everything trying to defend myself from him. The following days turned into a silent nightmare where every move I made was watched and analyzed as evidence against me. Robert had kept his promise. They were constantly monitoring me, but subtly, almost imperceptibly. It started with small details that I initially thought were coincidences. When I went out to buy tortillas at Mr. Rossi's store, I would casually run into Lucy shopping at the same place. When I went to pay my bills at the 7-Eleven, Robert would coincidentally appear in the line behind me. When I sat on the park bench to feed the stray cats, I would spot a stranger taking pictures from a distance. The first time I realized I was truly being followed was on Tuesday morning, when I left early to go to the Maxwell Street Market. A young man in a baseball cap and dark sunglasses was always walking the same distance behind me, stopping when I stopped, turning when I turned. When I went into the market and bought tomatoes from Mrs. Lupita, he pretended to buy cigarettes at the next stall, but I could see him taking pictures with his phone. "Mrs. Miller?" Mrs. Lupita said as she weighed my tomatoes. "Are you okay? You look nervous." I'm fine, Mrs. Lupita. Just a little tired. And that young man following you? Is that your grandson? That confirmed it wasn't my imagination. Even the market vendors had noticed I was being watched. That afternoon, when I returned to my apartment, I found Robert waiting for me in the living room. He'd had keys to my place for years, but had never used them without telling me first. Seeing him there, sitting on my sofa as if he owned the place, made me feel violated in my own space. "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, putting the tomatoes in the refrigerator. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you, and to review a few things." Robert had a folder open on the table, full of papers and photographs. When I got closer, I could see they were pictures of me, shopping at the market, sitting in the park, walking down the street, all taken without my knowledge. "What is this?" "Documentation for the case. Look at this photo. Here you are buying rotten tomatoes at the market. And this one. Here you are feeding stray animals instead of taking care of your own nutrition." I picked up one of the photographs. They had indeed caught me buying tomatoes that were a bit past their prime because they cost half the price. To Robert, this was evidence of mental decline. To me, it was economic survival. "Robert, those tomatoes were perfect for making sauce." "Mom, they were spoiled. Anyone in their right mind would have bought fresh tomatoes." "Fresh tomatoes cost $3 a pound. The ones I bought were $1.50. What does that matter? You have money to buy decent food." There was the problem. Robert thought I had money I didn't have. My widow's pension was $600 a month. After paying rent, electricity, gas, and water, I was left with maybe $100 for food. I had to eat on that for 30 days. $1.50 difference in tomatoes meant being able to buy rice or beans for the rest of the week. "I also have statements from the neighbors," Robert continued, pulling more papers from his folder. "The woman in 3B says she sometimes hears you talking to yourself. The man in 2A says you once mistook him for your late husband." The woman in 3B, Mrs. Gable, a bitter woman who complained about any noise and had always been jealous because my apartment had a better view than hers. And yes, sometimes I talk to myself, but who doesn't when they live in solitude? I spoke to my husband's photo, told him about my day, asked his advice on difficult decisions, not because I thought he was listening, but because it helped me process my thoughts. And the incident with the man in 2A had been an innocent misunderstanding. Mr. Kowalski looked a lot like my husband from behind. Same height, same hair color, same way of walking. One early morning in the dim light, I had greeted him by mistake. When he turned around and I saw he wasn't Rodolfo, I apologized, and we both laughed about the mix-up. But Robert had twisted it into evidence of hallucinations. "How long have you been collecting this?" I asked him. "Several months. Ever since I realized your condition was getting worse." Several months. My son had been spying on me, documenting every moment of vulnerability, every minor mistake, every sign of the loneliness and poverty I had been hiding so as not to worry him. "Robert, do you really think I'm crazy? Or do you just need a judge to think so?" The question made him uncomfortable. He shifted on the sofa and avoided my gaze. "Mom, it's not about you being crazy. It's about you not being able to take care of yourself anymore. It's normal at your age. It's not normal for a son to spy on his mother to justify locking her up. I'm not going to lock you up. I'm going to move you to a place where you'll get the care you need. Against my will. For your own good." We were silent for several minutes. Robert continued to review his papers, taking notes, preparing my destruction with the same meticulousness he applied to bank loans. I sat in my chair and watched him, trying to find some trace of the boy he had been, some sign that the son I had raised with so much love still existed beneath that mask of ambition and coldness. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I finally said. Robert looked up from his papers. "What? That you're not even trying to pretend this isn't about money." "It's not about money. Robert, don't insult my intelligence. I know exactly what my apartment is worth. I know how much these residences cost. And I know you've already done the math." My son closed the folder and looked at me with that expression of exhausted patience he used when he considered someone to be unreasonably stubborn. "Fine. Yes, there are financial benefits. But that doesn't mean my motives aren't genuine. I can be concerned about your well-being and be practical about finances at the same time." "Concerned about my well-being?" "Robert, It's been 6 months since you've asked me how I'm really doing. It's been a year since we've had a meal together. It's been 2 years since you've known anything about my friends, my routines, my daily struggles. How can you be concerned about the well-being of someone you don't even know? I know you perfectly well. Really? Do you know why I buy cheap tomatoes? Do you know why I talk to myself? Do you know why I get scared at night? Robert stared at me without answering. You don't know because you've never wanted to know. It's easier to decide I'm crazy than to understand why I'm sad. Mom, I'm sad, Robert. Not crazy. Sad. Your father died. You grew up and left. My friends have been passing away one by one, and I'm left alone in this apartment, living on a pension that barely allows me to survive. That's not dementia. That's widowhood. That's old age. That's poverty. Robert put his papers back in the folder and stood up from the sofa. When he spoke, his voice sounded tired. Mom, I understand this is difficult for you, but I have responsibilities. I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, college funds to pay for. I can't just drop my work every time you need something. I've never asked you to drop your work. Not directly. But when you call me because your gas is out, I have to take the morning off to come help you. When you get sick, Lucy has to cancel her plans to take you to the doctor. When you're scared at night, we lose sleep answering the phone. Every example he gave was real, but Robert presented them as if they were deliberate attacks on his comfort rather than pleas for help from an old woman who had no one else. And the solution is to get rid of me? The solution is to put you in a place where you have professional help available 24 hours a day, where you don't depend on us for every little emergency. Robert walked to the door but stopped before leaving. Mom, I'm going to give you one last chance. If you cooperate voluntarily, we can choose a really nice residence where you'll be happy. If you keep resisting, the judge will decide for you, and he'll probably send you to a much less pleasant place. And what if I don't want to go anywhere? Then you're going to lose. Because I have evidence, witnesses, medical documentation. What do you have? The question hung in the air after Robert left. What did I have? An old apartment? A miserable pension? A few neighbors who knew me but wouldn't necessarily defend me against the successful son in a suit and briefcase? But I also had something Robert didn't know about. $8.5 million and a lawyer who had prepared me for exactly this situation. That night, I called Mr. Hernandez. How is everything, Mrs. Miller? Robert is gathering evidence against me. He has photos, statements from neighbors, even recordings of my phone calls. Perfect. That means he's confident. Confident adversaries make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind of mistakes people make when they underestimate their opponents. Robert thinks you're a helpless old woman with no resources. He has no idea what's coming for him. The lawyer explained the next phase of the plan. In 2 days, Robert would formally file his petition with the judge. We would let him proceed without revealing that I had legal representation. Robert would think he had won easily. But ma'am, the lawyer warned me, from now on, everything you do will be watched and analyzed. You have to act exactly as Robert expects you to. You have to appear confused, vulnerable, in need of supervision. For how long? Until the day of the hearing. 17 more days. 17 days of pretending to be the frail, senile woman my son needed me to be to justify stealing my life. Can I do it? Mrs. Miller, you have survived poverty, widowhood, loneliness, and now the betrayal of your own son. Of course you can do it. That night, for the first time in weeks, I managed to sleep soundly, not because my problems had disappeared, but because I finally had a plan to solve them. The next day, my most important performance began, becoming the vulnerable old woman Robert needed me to be, while secretly preparing his downfall. The following days became a macabre play in which I was the star of my own feigned humiliation. Every morning, I woke up early to rehearse in front of my dresser mirror, how to walk more slowly, dragging my feet a little, how to pause longer when I spoke, as if searching for words, how to let my clothes look slightly disheveled, as if I'd lost interest in my appearance. The first test came on Wednesday morning, when Robert showed up unannounced with a woman he introduced as Dr. Evans, a specialist in geriatrics. Good morning, Mrs. Miller, the doctor said with that artificially sweet voice professionals use when dealing with the elderly. Your son asked me to come and have a chat with you. She was a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, with a leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I knew immediately she was part of the team Robert had hired to build his case. A doctor of what? I asked, feigning confusion. I'm a medical doctor, specializing in the care of older adults. I just want to ask you a few simple questions to get to know you better. Robert sat on the sofa, a small recorder in his hand. Don't worry, Mom. It's just an informal chat. Dr. Evans took a questionnaire from her briefcase and started with seemingly innocent questions. My full name, my date of birth, the address where I lived. I answered everything correctly, but added small, calculated hesitations. My name is Grace Miller. Or was it Grace Peterson? No, Miller. Grace Peterson Miller. That's what they called me when I was married. Robert and the doctor exchanged a meaningful glance. The married name I'd mentioned was real. That's what I had been called for 30 years of marriage. But to them, that confusion between my maiden name and married name was evidence of mental decline. What day is it today, Mrs. Miller? It's Wednesday, I answered after a dramatic pause. Or Thursday. The days get a little mixed up for me. It was Wednesday. I knew it perfectly because I had spent the night reviewing the plan with Mr. Hernandez, but feigning temporal confusion was part of my act. What year are we in? 2025, I answered without hesitation, but then added, although sometimes it feels like we're still in 2020. Everything has changed so much since my Rodolfo died. The doctor was constantly taking notes. Every pause, every moment of confusion, every reference to my late husband was recorded as a symptom of cognitive decline. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast today? Here I had to be careful. I had eaten coffee with milk and 2 slices of toast with jam, but I decided to add an element of confusion. I had my coffee, and I think I ate something. Toast? Yes, toast. Though I don't remember if I warmed it up properly. Sometimes I forget to turn on the toaster. Robert leaned forward. You see, Doctor? Yesterday I found her trying to heat up bread in a pan without any butter. She almost started a fire. That was a lie. I had never done such a thing. But Robert was inventing incidents to support his narrative, and I couldn't contradict him without breaking my character as a confused old woman. The evaluation continued for an hour. The doctor asked me to perform simple tasks, write my name, remember a short list of words, draw a clock. In everything, I inserted small, deliberate errors that could be interpreted as signs of mild dementia. When I drew the clock, I put all the numbers in the right place, but made the hands point to a different time than she had asked for. When I tried to remember the list of words, I forgot one of the 3 she had told me, but perfectly remembered the other 2. One last question, Mrs. Miller. How do you handle your finances? Do you pay your bills yourself? Well, I said, glancing nervously at Robert, I try to pay what I can, but sometimes the numbers get jumbled. Robert helps me with the hard stuff. What kind of stuff? You know, the bank. Important papers. I only know how to do simple math, like how much the bread or the tomatoes cost. The doctor closed her notebook and put everything back in her briefcase. Mrs. Miller, thank you very much for your time. It has been a pleasure meeting you. After she left, Robert stayed with me to review how the visit went. What did you think of the doctor, Mom? Very nice, I replied. Although I don't understand why she needed to ask me so many questions. I feel fine. She just wanted to make sure you're getting the care you need. Robert seemed pleased with how the evaluation had gone. He had gotten exactly what he needed. A professional assessment documenting my supposed mental decline. The following days were a constant succession of incidents orchestrated by Robert to strengthen his case. On Friday morning, he showed up with Lucy just after I had gone out to buy bread. Mom, he said when I returned, the lady at the bakery called us. She said you tried to pay for a $2 loaf of bread with a $100 bill. That was completely false. I had paid with exact change, as I always did to stretch my money. But Robert had either bribed the woman at the bakery or simply invented the story, knowing I couldn't prove it. Really? I asked, feigning concern. I don't remember that. This is exactly what we're talking about, Lucy chimed in. These memory lapses are getting worse. On Monday, Robert brought a locksmith to change the locks on my apartment. It's for your safety, Mom, he explained as the man worked. Last week you went out and left the door unlocked. Anyone could have walked in and robbed you. Another lie. I had never left my door unlocked. But with the new locks, Robert now had total control over who could enter and leave my own home. From now on, he said, handing me only one copy of the key. If you need to go out, let me know. We don't want you to have any accidents while you're out on the street alone. I was becoming a prisoner in my own apartment, and every restriction was presented as a protective measure for my own good. On Tuesday afternoon, Robert arrived with a different doctor, the famous Dr. Ramirez he had mentioned before. He was an older man, around 70, with the look of someone who had had a successful career, but was now willing to sell his reputation for money. Mrs. Miller, I'm Dr. Ramirez. Your son has told me about your situation, and I would like to conduct a full medical examination. Dr. Ramirez's evaluation was much more aggressive than Dr. Evans's. He asked me trick questions designed to confuse me, had me perform deliberately difficult tasks, and when I couldn't complete one perfectly, he noted every failure as evidence of cognitive decline. Can you subtract by sevens, starting from 100? He asked. 100 minus 7, 93. 93 minus 7. I paused for a long time, pretending to struggle with the calculation. 86? It was correct, but I had taken too long to answer by Dr. Ramirez's standards. Can you remember these 3 words? Apple, bicycle, happiness? I'm going to ask you for them in a few minutes. For the rest of the exam, I repeated the words in my mind. Apple, bicycle, happiness. But when the time came to repeat them, I pretended I only remembered 2. Apple and bicycle? But there was a third word. It was something nice. Joy? Wasn't it joy? Dr. Ramirez wrote extensively in his notebook. When he finished, he asked to speak with Robert alone. I heard them talking in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear them from the living room. It's a clear case of mild to moderate cognitive decline, I heard the doctor say. Short-term memory problems, difficulty with simple calculations, occasional temporal confusion. Is it enough for the legal proceedings? Robert asked. More than enough. I'll write up a report that clearly states that the lady does not have the capacity to make important financial or legal decisions. And what if another doctor evaluates her and disagrees? Don't worry, my report will be very detailed and technical. Any doctor who examines her later will find inconsistencies that will support my diagnosis. Robert paid him in cash. I saw the exchange from the crack in the door. $1,000 for a false diagnosis that would rob me of my freedom. That night, after everyone had left, I sat in my kitchen and wrote down everything I had witnessed in a notebook. Every lie, every manipulation, every bribe. Mr. Hernandez had told me to document everything, and I was compiling evidence of a criminal conspiracy led by my own son. As I wrote, I thought about the irony of my situation. Robert considered me too senile to manage my own life, yet I was orchestrating a complex legal counteroffensive that required memory, planning, and strategic intelligence. If I really had dementia, would I be able to fake having it so convincingly? On Wednesday morning, Robert arrived with the final documents for me to sign. Mom, these are the last papers before the hearing. I just need you to sign here to authorize the transfer to the residence. What happens if I don't sign? Then the judge will decide for you, and he'll probably send you to a much worse place. I looked at the documents. They were voluntary admission contracts, powers of attorney, and authorizations for the sale of my apartment. If I signed, Robert would win without needing to go to court. If I didn't sign, we would have to face each other before a judge. Robert, I said, looking up from the papers, do you promise you'll visit me often at the residence? Of course, Mom. We'll come see you every week. It was another lie. Once they locked me away and sold my apartment, Robert would have no reason to visit. I would just be a recurring expense that he would minimize as much as possible. All right, I said finally, but not today. I need a few more days to prepare myself mentally. Robert was impatient, but he agreed. I'll give you until Friday. After that, there's no more time. Friday. That was 2 days before the hearing, and Robert was giving me until the last moment to surrender voluntarily. He didn't know that I had been counting every day, every hour, every minute, until the moment I could reveal that the senile old woman he had been manipulating was actually a millionaire with legal resources he had never imagined. 48 hours until my revenge. On Thursday night, the eve of the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, watching the shadows the streetlight cast on the ceiling, going over every detail of the plan I had been preparing for weeks. In a few hours, my entire world would change forever, one way or another. At 5 a.m, my phone rang. It was Robert. "Mom, are you awake?" "Yes, honey. I couldn't sleep. It's normal to be nervous, but don't worry. Everything will be fine. I'll come by at 10 to take you to the courthouse." His voice sounded relaxed, confident. He was sure he had won before the battle even began. "Robert," I said, faking the trembling voice of a frightened old woman, "do you think the judge will be nice to me?" "Of course, Mom. Judges understand these situations. They just want what's best for you." After hanging up, I got up and made myself a strong coffee. I needed to be completely alert for what was coming. I showered carefully, did my hair as I did for special occasions, and chose my navy blue dress, the one I had worn to Robert's college graduation. I wanted to look dignified when I finally revealed the truth. At 8, Mr. Hernandez called to review the final details. "Are you ready, Mrs. Miller?" "I'm ready. Remember, when you get to the courthouse, act exactly as you have been. Confused, vulnerable, in need of help. I will be there, but don't acknowledge me until the time is right." "And when will that be?" "When your son has presented all his evidence and feels completely sure of his victory. Then, and only then, will I ask for permission to present additional evidence." The plan was risky. If something went wrong, if the judge decided not to hear new evidence, if Robert suspected something ahead of time, I would truly lose everything. Robert arrived promptly at 10, accompanied by Lucy and Dr. Ramirez. They were dressed as if for an important business meeting, which in a way is exactly what this was for them. "Are you ready, Mom?" Robert asked, looking at my blue dress. "You look very elegant." "It's my Sunday dress," I replied. I wanted to look presentable for the judge. In the car on the way to the courthouse, Lucy explained what was going to happen. "It's very simple, Grace. The judge will ask you a few questions, and you just have to answer honestly. Don't try to seem more capable than you really are." The advice was ironic, coming from someone who had been pushing me to pretend to be less capable than I truly was. "What if I get nervous and can't speak?" "Don't worry," Robert interjected. "I'll be there to help you explain things you don't understand." The Cook County Family Court was a gray, imposing building with long hallways that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. As we walked in, I could see Mr. Hernandez sitting on a bench in the hallway, reading a newspaper. He glanced at me over his glasses but gave no sign of recognition. The courtroom was small and formal, with dark wood paneling and an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. There were fewer than 20 seats, mostly empty except for a few law students observing the proceedings as part of their practical education. The judge was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and glasses, who looked like he had seen this type of case thousands of times. When we entered, he was reviewing a stack of thick files. "Good morning," he said without looking up. "This is the matter of Robert Miller versus Grace Miller. Petition for guardianship. Are all parties present?" Robert stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. I am Robert Miller, the petitioner. This is my mother, Grace Miller." "Does Mrs. Miller have legal representation?" Robert answered for me. "No, Your Honor. My mother doesn't understand the nature of the proceedings well enough to hire a lawyer." The judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Miller, do you understand why you are here today?" I feigned confusion, looking nervously at Robert. "I think Robert says I need help? I'm not really sure." "Your Honor," Robert intervened, "as you can see, my mother is disoriented about the situation. That's why we are here." The judge nodded and began to review the file. "Mr. Miller, I see you have submitted medical evidence, witness statements from neighbors, and documentation of incidents suggesting cognitive decline in your mother. Can you summarize your claims?" Robert stood up and, with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed his presentation multiple times, began to lay out his case. "Your Honor, my mother, Grace Miller, age 69, can no longer care for herself safely." Over the past few months, I have documented multiple incidents demonstrating her cognitive decline. Significant memory loss, confusion about dates and places, and trouble managing basic tasks like cooking and paying bills. He took out the folder I had seen in my apartment and began to present the photos, the neighbors' statements, the recordings of my calls asking for help. Here we have photographic evidence of my mother purchasing spoiled food, showing a lack of judgment in making basic decisions about her nutrition. The judge examined the photos of the tomatoes I had bought at the market. We also have statements from neighbors who have observed erratic behavior, talking to herself, confusing strangers with deceased individuals, leaving doors unlocked. Robert continued for 20 minutes, meticulously building a portrait of a senile old woman who was a danger to herself. Each piece of evidence had been carefully selected and presented to support his narrative. Finally, Your Honor, we have the evaluation of Dr. Ramirez, a specialist in geriatrics, who has examined my mother and determined that she suffers from mild to moderate cognitive decline. Dr. Ramirez stood and presented his false report with the authority of his decades of medical experience. Your Honor, after a thorough examination of Mrs. Miller, I can confirm that she presents clear symptoms of cognitive decline, short-term memory problems, difficulty with simple calculations, temporal confusion, and a loss of judgment for making important decisions. The judge took notes as the doctor spoke. In your professional opinion, is Mrs. Miller capable of managing her own financial and legal affairs? No, Your Honor. In my opinion, she requires constant supervision to protect her from making decisions that could be financially detrimental. When the doctor finished, the judge addressed me. Mrs. Miller, do you understand what has been discussed here? I looked confusedly at Robert, then at the judge. I think Robert says I need to go live somewhere else. And what do you think about that? I don't know. If Robert says it's for the best, I let my voice crack a little. I just want to be okay. The judge seemed to be convinced. Robert had presented a solid case, seemingly backed by convincing medical and testimonial evidence. Mr. Miller, the judge said, have you considered less restrictive alternatives, such as in-home care or partial supervision? Yes, Your Honor, but my mother lives in an apartment that is not suitable for her condition. Furthermore, it needs to be sold to finance her long-term care. There it was. Robert had revealed his true motive. He needed to sell my apartment to pay for the residence that would financially benefit him. The judge was about to issue his decision when Mr. Hernandez stood up from his seat in the back of the room. Your Honor, I request permission to present additional evidence relevant to this case. Everyone turned to look at him. Robert looked confused, Lucy alarmed, and Dr. Ramirez nervous. Who are you? The judge asked. Mr. Hernandez, representing Mrs. Grace Miller. Mrs. Miller? The judge looked at me. Does this attorney represent you? This was the moment of truth. I looked at Mr. Hernandez, then at Robert, whose face had gone completely pale. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice no longer trembling. Mr. Hernandez represents me. The change in my tone was so dramatic that the entire room fell silent. Robert was staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Your Honor? Mr. Hernandez continued. I request permission to demonstrate that everything presented here today is part of a criminal conspiracy to strip my client of her rights and property. Criminal conspiracy? The judge leaned forward with renewed interest. Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence that Mr. Robert Miller has forged medical documents, bribed witnesses, and deceived this court to gain control over his mother's assets. Robert shot up. That's ridiculous. My mother doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer. She doesn't even understand what's happening. Mr. Hernandez smiled. Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that Mrs. Miller not only understands perfectly what is happening, but she also has considerable resources to defend herself. He took an official document from his briefcase that made my heart race. The confirmation of the lottery prize. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, my client won $8.5 million in the Powerball lottery. Far from being a destitute old woman in need of protection, she is a wealthy woman who has been the victim of an elaborate family scam. The silence in the room was so deep you could hear the air conditioning hum. Robert was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Absolute shock mixed with fury. Mom? He whispered. Is it true? I stood up from my chair, And when I spoke, my voice was firm and clear. Yes, Robert, it's true. And every lie you've told here today has been recorded. Robert's face went through a sequence of emotions I will never forget. First shock, then comprehension, then rage, and finally a kind of calculated terror as he realized the implications of what he had just heard. Your Honor, Mr. I. Hernandez continued, pulling more documents from his briefcase. For the past 3 weeks, my client has been meticulously documenting every aspect of this conspiracy. We have recordings of conversations where Mr. Miller admits to forging medical documents, evidence of payments to false witnesses, and records of how he has been preparing this fraud. Lucy had turned white as a sheet. Dr. Ramirez was glancing nervously at the door, as if considering a run for it. This is impossible, Robert muttered, but his voice had lost all the confidence it held minutes before. My mother can't. She isn't capable of what, Robert? I asked, remaining on my feet. Of thinking? Of planning? Of defending myself when my own son tries to steal my life? The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Mr. Hernandez, these are very serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? Of course, Your Honor. The lawyer turned on a digital recorder. We'll begin with this conversation between Mr. Miller and Dr. Ramirez, recorded last Tuesday in my client's apartment. Robert's voice filled the room. Is it enough for the legal proceedings? And then Dr. Ramirez's reply. More than enough. I'll write up a report that clearly states that the lady does not have the capacity to make important financial or legal decisions. Dr. Ramirez sank into his seat. Robert stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. And here, the lawyer continued, we have the conversation where they discuss payment for fraudulent services. The doctor's voice came through clearly. Don't worry. My report will be very detailed and technical. Any doctor who examines her later will find inconsistencies that will support my diagnosis. The judge stopped writing and stared intently at Dr. Ramirez. Doctor, is that your voice on the recording? Dr. Ramirez stammered. Your Honor, there may have been a misunderstanding about falsifying a medical diagnosis in exchange for money. The judge no longer seemed like the tired official who had been hearing a routine case. Now he was clearly outraged. Robert finally found his voice. Your Honor, even if my mother won money, that doesn't change the fact that she needs supervision. The money just makes her more vulnerable to scammers. Scammers like you? I retorted. And for the first time in decades, I saw my son physically recoil at my tone. Mr. Hernandez produced more documents. Your Honor, we also have evidence that Mr. Miller has been illegally surveilling his mother, taking photographs without her consent, and pressuring neighbors to give false testimony. He handed the judge the photos Robert had secretly taken, along with sworn affidavits from some of the neighbors he had contacted. Mrs. Gable from the next building testifies that Mr. Miller offered her $100 to say she had seen his mother behaving erratically. Mr. Rossi from the corner store confirms that the incident with the $100 bill that Mr. Miller reported never happened. Every document the lawyer presented was a slap in the face to Robert. His carefully constructed case was crumbling piece by piece. Furthermore, I continued, addressing the judge directly, I want the court to know that for these past few weeks, I have been faking the exact symptoms my son needed me to have. Every confusion, every lapse of memory, every moment of apparent vulnerability was deliberately acted out to allow him to reveal the true nature of his intentions. Robert stared at me with a mixture of awe and horror. This whole time, you were faking? This whole time I was protecting myself from my own son, who turned out to be a greater threat to my well-being than any mental illness. The judge intervened. Mrs. Miller, are you saying you consciously deceived medical evaluators? I am saying I acted exactly as my son expected me to act, while secretly documenting his criminal attempts to steal my freedom and my property. Lucy finally found her voice. This is ridiculous. Grace can't even use a smartphone properly. Actually, Mr. Hernandez said with a smile, my client recorded several of your conversations using precisely a smartphone, including this one, where you threatened to monitor her movements. Lucy's voice filled the room. Starting tomorrow, we'll be monitoring your movements. If you try to do anything stupid, like give away your money or sign strange documents, we'll use it as further evidence of your mental incapacity." Lucy slumped in her chair, clearly defeated. The judge reviewed all the documents for several minutes while the room remained in absolute silence. Finally, he looked up. "In my 30 years as a judge, I have never seen such a clear case of elder abuse and attempted fraud. Mr. Miller, not only am I denying your petition for guardianship, but I am ordering a full criminal investigation into your actions." Robert shot up. "Your Honor, all I did was try to protect my mother." "Silence!" The judge's gavel echoed in the room. "What you did was conspire to strip a competent woman of her fundamental rights through false documents and purchase testimony." He turned to Dr. Ramirez. "Doctor, I will be reporting your conduct to the State Medical Board. You will likely face criminal charges for forgery and the possible loss of your medical license." Dr. Ramirez rose shakily and left the courtroom without a word. "Mrs. Miller," the judge looked at me with something that looked like respect. "Is there anything else you would like to add to these proceedings?" I stood up straight, no longer feigning any frailty. "Yes, Your Honor. I want it to be clear that for all these years, my son Robert received unconditional love, financial sacrifices that left me in poverty, and my complete dedication. In return, he conspired to steal not only my money, but my dignity and my freedom." I looked directly at Robert, who could no longer meet my gaze. I also want the court to know that despite all this, if Robert had come to me with honesty when I won the lottery, if he had said, "Mom, I'm happy for you. How can I help you manage this new situation?" I would have shared my good fortune with him, because that's how real family love works. The tears finally began to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of weakness, but of liberation. But he chose deceit, manipulation, and attempted theft. He chose to see me as a victim instead of his mother, and that choice has consequences. The judge nodded gravely. "Mrs. Miller, this court fully recognizes your mental and legal capacity. I not only deny the petition for guardianship, but I order that any document you may have signed under duress during this period be considered null and void." He turned to Robert. "Mr. Miller, you are prohibited from contacting your mother or approaching her residence until the criminal charges that will be filed against you are resolved. Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest." Robert finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he had lost. Not only had he failed to get control of my money, but he had completely destroyed our relationship and was facing possible criminal charges. "Mom," he mumbled, "I never wanted—" "Yes, you did, Robert," I replied with a deep sadness. "You wanted exactly what you tried to do. The only difference is, you didn't expect me to be smart enough to stop you." I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, accompanied by Mr. Hernandez. Robert stayed behind with Lucy, probably trying to figure out how his perfect plan had turned into his total destruction. On the steps of the courthouse, I took a deep breath of the cool afternoon air. For the first time in months, I felt completely free. "How do you feel, Mrs. Miller?" Mr. Hernandez asked me. "I feel like I've gotten my life back," I replied, "and like I've finally learned that real love never requires you to sacrifice your dignity." That night, in my apartment that was now truly mine again, I sat in my chair by the window and thought about everything that had changed. I had $8.5 million, the freedom to do whatever I wanted with my life, and the satisfaction of having protected my dignity from someone who had tried to steal it. But I also had a broken heart from losing the son I thought I knew, and the loneliness of understanding that the people we trust the most are sometimes the ones who can hurt us the most. The price of freedom had been discovering my own son was my enemy, but it was a price that had been worth paying. The days that followed the hearing passed in a strange mix of liberation and melancholy. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning without the weight of anxiety crushing my chest, without the constant worry of how much money I had left for food, without the fear that someone else would make decisions about my life. But I also woke up to the empty echo of a loss I never thought I would have to face: the living death of my relationship with Robert. Mr. T. Hernandez had handled all the legal aspects of my new financial situation with an efficiency that impressed me. The $8.5 million were secure in accounts only I could touch, protected by trusts and legal structures that would make it impossible for anyone else to try and claim them. I had bought my freedom not just from Robert, but from the entire system that allowed abusive children to control their elderly parents. The first week after the trial, I tried to go back to my normal routine, but I soon realized I no longer had a normal routine. I no longer needed to count change to buy bread. I no longer had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying medicine. I no longer had to walk 8 blocks to the market to find cheap vegetables. Financial freedom was liberating, but also disorienting for someone who had lived 69 years measuring every dollar. On Tuesday morning, while drinking coffee in my kitchen, I decided to do something I hadn't done in decades. I bought fresh flowers for my table, yellow roses that cost more than I used to spend on food for 3 days. I put them in a vase that had belonged to my mother, and for the first time in years, my apartment felt like a home and not a survival shelter. That same day, I received the first of many calls that would change my perspective on what it meant to have money. Mrs. Miller? This is Patricia Vega from the Center for Women and Family Services. Yes, speaking. We heard about your case in the news. It's truly inspiring to see a woman your age successfully defend herself against family abuse. We wanted to ask if you would be interested in speaking with other women who are going through similar situations. The proposal took me by surprise. For weeks, I had been so focused on my own battle that I hadn't considered that my experience could be useful to others. What kind of help do they need? Mainly guidance and emotional support. Many older women face abuse from their own adult children but feel too ashamed or scared to report it. Your story could give them the courage they need to protect themselves. That afternoon, I went to the center, located in a renovated brownstone in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. It was a warm, welcoming place, decorated with soft colors and plants that created a healing, rather than institutional atmosphere. Ms. Vega was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a way of speaking that conveyed both professionalism and genuine compassion. Mrs. Miller, every week we have a support group for older women who have experienced family abuse. Many of them are struggling with feelings of guilt and confusion about how to set boundaries with adult children who manipulate them. She led me to a room where 8 women of similar ages to mine were sitting in a circle, sharing tea and cookies. When I entered, they all looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "Ladies," Ms. Vega said, "I'd like to introduce you to Grace Miller, whom we've been talking about. A woman with white hair, who I later learned was named Eleanor, was the first to speak. Mrs. Miller, is it true that your son tried to put you in a nursing home to take your money?" "Yes," I answered simply, "and he came very close to succeeding." "How did you find the courage to fight back?" asked another woman named Diane. "My son takes my pension check every month and tells me it's to manage my finances, but I know he spends it on alcohol." For the next 2 hours, I listened to stories that broke my heart. Women whose children had stolen their life savings. Mothers who had been isolated from their friends because their children considered them a bad influence. Grandmothers who worked caring for their grandchildren without pay or respect, while their adult daughters lived lifestyles financed by their free labor. "The hardest part," said a woman named Margaret, "is that people don't understand how a child can hurt their own mother. When I try to explain what's happening to me, they tell me I must be exaggerating, that surely my children only want what's best for me." I recognized that experience immediately. The isolation that comes when your reality doesn't match society's expectations of family relationships. The problem, I told them, is that we were taught that a mother's love must be unconditional. But no one ever taught us that it doesn't mean we have to accept abuse in return. When the session ended, several of the women approached me with specific questions about the legal aspects of protecting their finances and rights. I realized that my experience with Mr. Hernandez had given me knowledge that could be invaluable to them. That night, I called the lawyer to propose something that had been growing in my mind all afternoon. "Mr. Hernandez, I want to use part of my money to create a legal fund for older women who are being abused by their families." "That's an excellent idea, Mrs. Miller. What did you have in mind specifically?" "I want women like the ones I met today to have access to quality legal representation without worrying about the cost. I want them to have someone to help them protect their finances, their property, and their rights, just like you did for me." We discussed the details for an hour. We decided to create a foundation that would provide free legal services, financial education, and emotional support for older women who were victims of family abuse. We would give it a name that reflected its purpose, the Dignity and Freedom Foundation. How much money do you want to allocate initially? The lawyer asked. $2 million, I replied without hesitation. That's enough to start big and help hundreds of women. As we talked about the practical aspects of creating the foundation, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about the future. For decades, my life had been defined by limitations. What I couldn't afford, what I couldn't do, what I couldn't change. Now I had the opportunity to define my life by what I could do. 3 days later, while I was reviewing documents for the foundation at my kitchen table, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found my 2 grandchildren, Alex, 15, and Sophia, 12, standing nervously in the hallway. "Hi, Grandma," Alex said, avoiding my gaze. "Can we come in?" "Of course, my loves. Come in." The children entered with the caution of someone unsure if they are welcome. They had grown so much since the last time I had really seen them. Not as part of the forced visits Robert organized when he needed a babysitter. "Grandma," Sophia said, perching on the edge of the sofa, we wanted to say we're sorry." "Sorry for what, my love?" "For not defending you when Mom and Dad said those awful things about you. We knew you weren't crazy." Alex finally looked at me. "And we wanted to ask if you still love us, after everything that happened." My heart melted. These children had been carrying guilt for their parents' actions, wondering if my love for them had changed because Robert and Lucy had tried to betray me. "My grandchildren," I said, sitting between them on the sofa. "You have nothing to apologize for. You are children, and it was not your responsibility to protect me from the adults. And yes, I love you just as much as I did before. Nothing that happened with your parents changes that." Sophia started to cry. "Mom told us you wouldn't want to see us anymore, that you were mad at the whole family. Your mom was wrong. I'm angry with the adults who tried to hurt me, but you two did nothing wrong." We spent the afternoon together, and for the first time in years, I was able to talk with my grandchildren as people, rather than as responsibilities their parents imposed on me. Alex told me about his struggles in school, his dreams of studying engineering, his worries about the future. Sophia told me about her friends, the books she was reading, and how she felt caught between the world of kids and the world of teenagers. "Grandma," Alex asked before they left, "is it true you won the lottery?" "Yes, it's true." "And does that mean you're rich now?" "It means I now have choices I didn't have before." Sophia hugged me tightly. "I'm glad. You deserve good things." After they left, I thought about the difference between genuine love and self-interested love. My grandchildren had come to see me because they were worried about our relationship, not because they knew I had money. Their presence in my life was a priceless gift. That night, as I prepared dinner in my kitchen that no longer smelled of scarcity, but of possibility, I reflected on all the changes that had occurred in my life. I had lost a son who turned out not to be who I thought he was, but I had gained clarity about my own worth and the freedom to define the rest of my life on my own terms. The money had given me power, but the experience of defending myself had given me something more valuable. The knowledge that I was stronger and smarter than anyone, including myself, had ever believed possible. And that, I decided as I looked at the yellow roses on my table, was the real prize I had won.